I'm especially happy today because I heard a presentation by Catherine a couple of months ago about the Hello Girls. I didn't know anything about the Hello Girls, and anytime I asked anybody, do you know of the Hello Girls, the answer was always no. And so I asked Catherine if she could come talk to our ministry about the Hello Girls, which is a group of French-speaking women who went to war in World War I and did not get recognized until 1977. I don't want to take too much of her thunder, but I read the book, The Hello Girls, which is an awesome book. I'm almost done with it. If anybody wants to read it, I'm happy to give it to you afterwards. It's just a great, great story of brave American women. So we're delighted to have her here today to tell us more about them. And she's going to be introduced. Christopher is also here. He is on the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission. And I'm going to introduce him first, and he's going to introduce our speaker. Thank you again for your attendance and your generosity and for supporting this ministry so wonderfully. Chris.
Thank you, Jenny. Try to avoid collisions here in that room. And I want to thank Jenny for inviting us and giving me this great intro here with her copy of the book, The Hello Girls. Who knows about the Hello Girls? Yeah, so I'll back up. In 2013, Congress passed and the President signed the legislation authorizing the establishment of the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission. And they told the Commission to figure out what is an appropriate commemoration of the centennial of World War I, which is the war that changed the world. It changed everything about the world. It's still changing us today. There's not a single geopolitical thing going on in this planet. You can't draw a straight line back to World War I. So it's tremendously important that we remember it. So the Centennial Commission had a bunch of ideas, and they told Congress, this is what we're planning to do. And Congress says, yeah, go do it. One of those ideas was to build a National World War I Memorial. National World War I Memorial. We had America, being America, doesn't do things the way everyone else does. And we built all our memorials in reverse order. First we built the Vietnam Memorial, then we built the Korea Memorial, and then we built the World War II Memorial, and some smart people, including Frank Buckles, the last surviving doughboy from World War I, said, well, wait a minute, where's the World War I Memorial? And so the commission members said, yeah, let's do this. And accomplished amazing things by raising $50 million and building the National World War I Memorial. Who knows where it is? Where's the Willard Hotel? Everybody know what the Willard Hotel is? Yes. Right in front of the Willard Hotel. It used to be Pershing Park. Now it's the National World War I Memorial. It's worth seeing now, but you really want to come back this fall when the bronze sculpture is installed at the memorial. It'll just be the most fantastic thing to see. I urge you to take a look at it. And the World War I Commission ceases to exist September 30. Amazing. A federal government agency that goes out of existence. Who knew such a thing could happen? But the Doughboy Foundation will continue after that, and we play taps every day at 5 o'clock p.m. at the National World War I Memorial. And so that's available, streamed online, live on YouTube, so that may be something that interests you there. So after the commission finished all of its work, the last thing the commission said to Congress in 2018 was, you know, there's this outfit called the Hello Girls, which, as Jenny mentioned, needs some recognition. In 1917, General Pershing got to France with the army, was setting things up, and discovered that he had a real problem. There was this amazing new technology called the telephone that was being implemented in war, which was the first time this had happened. And the American Expeditionary Forces got there, and they needed to be able to talk to the French army over the telephone. This was a problem because the operators, because back then, I see lots of people in this room old enough to remember when you had telephone operators. Back then, you didn't dial a phone. You picked up a phone, and an operator answered the call and said, hello, and they said, number please, and what you want to connect to. So if General Pershing wanted to talk to Marshal Foch, he had to pick up a phone. An American telephone operator had to connect with a French telephone operator, had to connect to Marshal Foch. Well, when there was doughboys from Montana trying to operate switchboards at a time when close to 90% of all the telephone operators in the United States were women, there was a problem, and Pershing identified it pretty quick, and he sent a note back to the U.S. to the Secretary of War and said, I need bilingual female telephone operators staff. And even though the Army didn't want that, and by the way, I've met a retired Marine here, the Navy and the Marine Corps both had females enlisted and working with the Army and Navy. But the Army, however, the Secretary of the War said, give Pershing what he needs. They put an advertisement in the newspapers that they needed a couple of hundred operators. They got 7,000 applications from across the country for bilingual telephone operators. Ultimately, 223 were deployed to France to combat. And these were America's first women soldiers because they were actively supporting combat operations. They weren't in the back. They were on the front line. Artillery was coming in. I think Carol will show you, Catherine will show you a picture of them sitting at the switchboard with gas masks and helmets on the back of their chair because they were in combat. The war was successfully completed thanks in no small part to these operators. General Pershing himself said they shortened the war by a year because they made everything work. And they really seriously changed tactical military communications. By using this new technology and by making things work, the Americans and French could react quickly to what the Germans were doing, and it brought the war to a close. The doughboys came home and had big parades. The whole world stayed in France and operated the phones for the Versailles Peace Treaty. All those negotiations there. President Wilson, of course, went to France, did the Versailles negotiations, came back home, and had changed his mind about whether women should get the vote or not. And he went to Congress and said, you know, they went and served in uniform and performed, and by gosh, they should be citizens and they should get the vote. And so the 19th Amendment was passed by Congress to a certain extent because of the Hello Girls work in France. The Hello Girls then came back to the U.S., took off their uniforms, went home, and the Army said, hey, you weren't soldiers. You were contractors. You were civilian contractors. You were never soldiers. Besides, even though they had uniforms, dog tags, foreign oath, you're not soldiers. And this went on until 1977, when finally Senator Goldwater and others finally passed an amendment saying not only the Hello Girls, but the WACs of World War II, and any other women who've been involved in a military organization where it was reasonable to assume that they were actually on active duty, were in fact on active duty, and were in fact veterans. So that was 1977. There were about 24 of the Hello Girls still alive in 1977. To get this, they were all gone before 2000, and that was that. But the commission said, you know, these women changed history. These women changed America. These women deserve the recognition of a congressional gold medal. That is the final recommendation of the commission, which is now being worked in Congress to give these women a gold medal. This is our third Congress doing this. We're getting close to 60 in the Senate. We've got over 100 now in the House, and we would certainly encourage you, after this is over, to pick up one of these postcards here, which has information about how to get in touch with senators and congressmen. Now, most of you all are from D.C. We had to say that Eleanor Holmes Norton was you early got on board, so you're good there. But if you have any contacts with any offices, you're welcome to encourage them to become co-sponsors of the Hello Girls Congressional Gold Medal legislation. That's the high-level picture. But at the specific level, these were individual women who gave up their life where they were in 1917 and swore an oath and went off and served. And I want you to hear from the granddaughter of one of those women. Carolyn Bourgeon here is the granddaughter of Hello Girl Marie-Edmée Leroux, who was a bilingual French-Canadian from Rhode Island?
Yes, at one point, yes.
Okay, who raised her hand, swore to serve, went off, served, came back, was told she was not a veteran, she didn't come back. I tell you what, instead of me talking about Marie-Edmée Leroux, Catherine's going to talk about Marie-Edmée Leroux, and then I'll be back if you have any more questions. Catherine, please.
Okay, who can not hear me? Oh, excellent. Good morning and thank you. My name is Catherine Bourgeon. I'm the granddaughter of a Hello Girl, Edmée Leroux. And I'm very proud of my grandmother.
And I would like to start by saying that I'm not a public speaker, but thanks to Chris Christopher and the involvement with the Congressional World War I Centennial Commission, I've adapted and become more comfortable with it. So I would like to start off real quick talking about our table here. We have several items. As Chris mentioned, the postcards are yours. Please take them. And if you have cousins, relatives, friends in other states where we do not have co-sponsorship, please share this with those folks and ask them to write, call, and if necessary, visit the field offices of the senators that are not yet co-sponsored. We're at 59 right now. We need 67 for action to take place. So we're very excited. I have also a handout here of a letter that was written up by Elizabeth Cobbs, who's the author of the Hello Girls book. And this is like a letter petition that has 55 historians' signatures as well, saying the Congressional Gold Medal should be awarded. And I have a few sheets left of America's First Women Soldiers' frequently asked questions. Speaking of Elizabeth Cobbs, this is her book. She wrote it in 2018. I love it, not only because she accurately tells their story, thanks to artifacts and diaries that were survived, but she sets the scene as to what was going on in the United States, politically, socially, what were our concerns, what were our views on going into this foreign war in Europe. And it sets the stage to the framework as to why the Hello Girls, the challenges and their impact and what they overcame. There's also another author that's on our team, Claudia Friedel. She was a school teacher and she loves writing nonfiction children's books. And she wrote one for about third to fifth grade level, and she focused on, as Chris said, there's 223 Hello Girls that were deployed. She focused on Grace Banker. Grace Banker is the chief of all the telephone operators. She started off as the chief in Unit 1, and she became the chief because she had previous professional telephone operator experience when she got out of college. But this is a great book, a great gift idea for grandkids. Has wonderful illustrations telling the story. And then in the back, it has, the reference material that was used. Now, both of these books you can find in your local library, or you can buy them on Amazon or bookstores. So there's some photos up here of the ceremony we had on May 3rd. So I'll start at that point. May 3rd of this month, there was a ceremony, a grave marker dedication ceremony for my grandmother. For reasons unknown to me and lost to time, she was buried at Fort Lincoln Cemetery in an unmarked grave. And I don't know why. Since I joined the World War I Centennial Commission panel, and the Doughboy Foundation supported the effort to get her not only a grave marker, but one to recognize her military service in World War I. So we had this fabulous ceremony, finally after 79 years, to dedicate a grave marker for her. And we invited just about everybody we knew, and we were fortunate to include the Canadian ambassador and the defense attaché, Major General Saint-Louis, and a representative from the French embassy, as well as we invited Maryland state officials, senators, but of course they're busy. And we had tons of support, and it was a beautiful ceremony, something I never would have imagined ever happening. So, and it was fortunate, we were fortunate to get an article, 2-page article in the Washington Post. So if you haven't recycled your newspaper since the beginning of this month, you might find it, or online. And then there's some photos up here of that ceremony. So, oh, and one other item. I was gifted this copy of Grace Banker's diary. Grace Banker, as I mentioned, was the chief of all the telephone operators. And in this picture, there you can see myself, but in the middle is Carolyn. Sometimes Chris calls me Carolyn, but because we're all hanging out together. Carolyn Timby is the granddaughter of Grace Banker. And Grace Banker was so lucky, I guess being the chief of the telephone operators, she got away with it. But all of her army chest of medals and uniforms, and she kept a diary, which was technically illegal back then during war. But it all survived, and the family preserved it, and so Carolyn has great artifacts. And then next to Carolyn is Donna Ayers, and her great aunt was in Unit 2, Olive Shaw. And Olive Shaw is mentioned in the bill. And Olive Shaw grew up in a French-Canadian family. And then after World War I, and she's recovered from tuberculosis, she went on with her life, and she actually ended up working in Edith Norse Rogers' office on the Hill. She was a representative in the 1930s. And what we find remarkable is Donna's great aunt worked on veterans' bills when she wasn't eligible for the same courtesy, to say the least. So these women not only did something spectacular back then, but their lives, as they went on with their lives after the war, a lot of them did remarkable things for their time. So, let me tell you the story about my grandmother. And then afterwards, I understand, we will have a little Q&A. Oh, and we decided to go low tech, no tech. So I only have a few handouts that I'll circulate so you can get a better look. And unfortunately, this particular article I think is terrific, and I'll talk about it in a little bit. But I got it off Google Books. When Ancestry or Family Search didn't come up with something, I went to Google, and I was quite surprised because I've never dabbled in Google Books, and it had some treasures. The print is small because that's how it was back then in 1918, but when you're done looking at these, please return them to the table. So, I'll put those there for now. So, good morning or good afternoon. When I started my genealogy research almost 2 years ago, I knew nothing about how to do this kind of research, or how many people I would end up meeting, or that I would even end up on Capitol Hill sharing my grandmother's story. Who knew that 106 years ago, or 106 years later, that I would end up meeting and working alongside Carolyn Timby, the granddaughter of Grace Banker, who was the chief of all the Hello Girls, and who was saluted by General Pershing himself. And also Donna Ayers and her great aunt, Olive Shaw of Unit 2, who worked with Congresswoman Edith Norse Rogers on Capitol Hill in the 1930s, and who lived long enough to receive her discharge papers. A question often asked, how did my genealogy research take me to Capitol Hill? Well, while waiting for an answer from the National Archives about my grandmother's military records, I turned to Google to look for secondary sources, and I found a website for the Congressional World War I Centennial Commission, and I found Chris Christopher. So after several emails and phone calls with Chris, he invited me to join their panel to campaign for the Congressional Gold Medal. But never did I imagine that accepting this invitation would result in this life-changing impact on my family's history. Another frequent question asked, how did this ceremony, referring to the May 3rd grave marker dedication ceremony, happen? So after a panel session briefing Capitol Hill, we had two sessions, one for the House staffers and then one for the Senate staffers last year. Allison Finkelstein from the Arlington National Cemetery, and James Veris from the National Cemetery Association Administration, asked me if I knew where my grandmother was buried. I replied that I did, and she's in an unmarked grave. The reason was lost to time. But I never expected answering that simple question would turn into a magnificent military honors ceremony where she would finally receive her first grave marker that honored her military service. My only conclusion is divine intervention, putting all the right people in the right place at the right time. And ever since, I've been filled with joy and gratitude for having this happen. Doing genealogy research, you never know what you may find. Through an online source, a short newspaper article in French was discovered in late September 2022, almost exactly 100 years to the date, about a contest at the Centocelle Aerodrome, a former military airport outside of Rome, Italy. It was a parachute jump contest in October of 1922, and participating was a French delegation of 6 parachutists. Guess whose name was on that list? My grandmother, Edme LaRue. I had to reread the article several times because I just couldn't believe it. How did she get involved in that? I guess it was the roaring 20s in Paris. To add to this, there is a bit of a funny coincidence. I did my one and only tandem jump back in 1997. So, I don't know, maybe it runs in the family, I just didn't know it. When I was a child, my mother told me that her mother had a beautiful singing voice. Edme followed her own dream and passion for music and singing by using her native bilingual skills that led her to answer the call of the U.S. Army during World War I and get a free boat ride to France. Up until now, I only knew the family stories of my grandmother. With my research, I wanted to go beyond those stories. During my hunt, often late at night, I became enraptured looking for her to find out who was she. Thanks to today's online genealogy resources, encouraging friends, like a helpful LDS neighbor, a friend with a special connection, and even total strangers who also became enraptured by her story assisted me to get to know her. I traveled online to find my ancestors, and I traveled in person to meet living relatives in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I discovered my long line of French-Canadian roots. On my maternal side, I'm a descendant of the King's daughters, and on my paternal side, I'm a daughter of the American Revolution. Let me tell you a bit more about my grandmother. She was born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada in February of 1895 to Joseph Hilaire Leroux and Blanche Yvonne Héroux. When she was a child, they moved to Providence, Rhode Island, where in 1910 she studied at the Rhode Island School of Design at the age of 15 years old. The death of her father in 1911 changed the course of their lives. My great-grandmother remarried an American and moved to Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and eventually to Maryland, where she lived until her passing in 1940. I surmise that during the time of 1911 to 1917, that Edme pursued her music studies through another school, the music school called École de Chant by Plamondon and Michaud. Arthur Plamondon was a famous French-Canadian tenor, and his first wife, Alice Michaud, a famous French soprano. According to a newspaper article, while a student of this music school, Edme had won a scholarship which was sponsored by the French government for the best of the French-Canadian students to study in Paris, but the war interrupted this plan. Nevertheless, she found another opportunity. She answered an ad in an American newspaper. She volunteered to become a bilingual telephone operator in the U.S. Army Signal Corps. As Chris said, out of a total of 7,600 applicants, 233 women, bilingual women, were selected, vetted, then trained by AT&T as operators, and then further trained by the U.S. Army in basic military drills, procedures, and etiquette. Edme was 23 years old when she was sworn into the U.S. Army Signal Corps, put on her uniform, and was assigned to Unit 4. The U.S. Army muster roll in 1918 listed her guardian as Arthur Plamondon, her music instructor. By June 1918, Edme and her unit boarded the USS Lapland from Hoboken, New Jersey, bound for France, sailing through dangerous waters patrolled by German U-boats. So I'm going to circulate this. On the back side is the article I mentioned, or I will mention, that came from the Telephone Review in December of 1918. And when you go to Google, you know, all kinds of things pop up. And for the longest time, just this little sketch popped up. And I would type in Edme LaRue, 1918, or just her name. And I couldn't see the caption underneath. So for the longest time, I ignored this thing. I'm like, oh, that could be anybody, you know. One day, I finally clicked on it, and oh my goodness. This publication was a wealth of information about the Hello Girls during World War II. So anyways, my grandmother in this case was interviewed, and it starts up here under an old sweet song, and it runs to where the little line is here. But this publication featured letters, excerpts, unit photos with all the women's names. And what I love about it is I get to read her own words. So, if you don't mind. Oh, let me hold. This is the troop ship, the USS Lapland. Anybody know what the camouflage is called back then? I called it zebra stripes, and somebody said, no. It's razzle dazzle. So she hops on the USS Lapland, leaves from Hoboken, New Jersey, and they make it to France. So in France, she was stationed in Tours at the Supply Service base and in Paris at the U.S. Army offices. I haven't discovered anywhere else at this point, but those are the two places that I know she's worked as a bilingual telephone operator. So now she's working as a hello girl, handling calls about classified tactical battlefield communications in English and French any time of the day or night, under any kind of circumstances, even the dangers of frontline combat. Even in Paris, there was the Paris gun that could fire from 70 miles away and reach and bomb Paris, and they were subject to these conditions as well, these women. So during a late night research, which it always seemed to happen just when I'm about to give up around midnight, something would pop up for me. So that's why I say it was always late nights. I discovered this wonderful publication by AT&T called the Telephone Review that's circulating. It was a monthly publication that reported on all aspects of the telephone. During the war, each monthly issue featured several of the Hello Girls who were interviewed about their experiences. My grandmother was in the December 1918 issue. As a part of their training, these women did not discuss the details of their work. I don't know what the exact question was asked of my grandmother, but she chose to talk about reconnecting with friendships interrupted by war, continuing her music studies, attending conferences, and attending and assisting High Mass on her first Sunday in an old cathedral in Tours, where she saw so many wounded soldiers with their proud family members, and all of that brought her to tears. She also took long walks in the countryside. During one of these long walks in the countryside, she encountered an elderly couple that was displaced from Alsace-Lorraine region in France, and she ended up singing an old Alsatian song while playing an organ. She seemed to make the best of her circumstances, even in the smallest ways. But in June 1919, Edme was discharged from the U.S. Army Signal Corps, not as a veteran. When the Hello Girls were discharged, they had no idea that they were leaving one war, only to have to start another one on Capitol Hill to be recognized as veterans. This one endured until 1977. Only a handful of these women lived long enough to know they had won and were finally veterans. Today, some of their descendants, like Carolyn, Donna, and myself, We're now campaigning with the support of the Congressional World War I Centennial Commission and the Doughboy Foundation on Capitol Hill to once again give them one last honor, the Congressional Gold Medal. Ed May is symbolic of all these women of the U.S. Army Signal Corps who were ignored for their service and forgotten by their nation. They were America's first women soldiers who changed the course and perception of women in the military and influenced the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Today, we are also determined, like they were. We can use your support and your voice. That's why I say, if you have family in other states where there is no co-sponsorship yet, please reach out to them and encourage them. The World War I Commission has set up a, what do you want to call it, a toolkit?
A website with a toolkit.
Yes, a website with a toolkit, and there's 2 easy ways. If you like using your phone, you use the QR code. If you don't like it that way, you go directly, here's the website. And it will give you the background about the Hello Girls, and then it breaks it down by state. So you click on, say, Wyoming, for example, and up will pop the senators and the representatives. And they'll give the status of each of those folks, whether they're co-sponsoring or not. And if they are co-sponsoring, you have the choice to either do nothing or send them a thank you note. Or if they're not co-sponsoring, you click on their name, and then it takes you to another link where the World War I Commission has a starter text. They wrote the first paragraph for you, and then you could add your 2 cents, hit send, and it's gone, and you're done. And we would say thank you very much. In fact, I mentioned Wyoming because Wyoming has not responded yet. So we would love for Wyoming to jump on. Like I said, we're at 59, we need 67. And we just got to do it now. So recently, thanks to this article I mentioned in the Washington Post, the reporter Petula Dvorak put me in touch with a National Archives researcher who answered my question. I could not find proof online if my grandmother participated in the peace talks communications. And Brian, I think is his name, instantly supplied 3-page documentation that my grandmother, did participate as a bilingual telephone operator for that. Because a lot of the women also didn't leave until by January of 1920. They were truly the last to go home. They stayed, and when they were recruited, they were told, you're in it until we win it. And that also meant get through the peace talks. And for example, like Grace Banker, she ended up in Koblenz, Germany as part of the occupation force because they needed operators over there. And I'm going to digress it a little bit further. And the Hello Girls book, like I said, is fantastic. And there's an entry here that I just absolutely love. Speaking of the peace talks, that I'm going to read to you here. You know how we use the term influencers today? Well, the Hello Girls, in my opinion, they did their patriotic duty because that's what they wanted to do. They didn't go in there to change, well, they wanted to go and help win the war, which would change the world, but they didn't expect to come home and be influencers on changing American society. So President Wilson, when he started off in his as being president, he was very much against women's right to vote. He thought women with a political opinion was vulgar, didn't want to hear it, but because seeing them, the Hello Girls, in their role, and after all this time of how well they did it and were efficient, and he was very impressed. So he was addressing Congress here, and it says, the president focused on female citizens who had done their simple, plain duty, some upon the very skirts and edges of the battle itself. The war could not be fought without them. Are we alone to ask and take the utmost women can give, service and sacrifice of every kind, and still say that we do not see what title that gives them? The President asked. Shall we admit them to only a partnership of sacrifice and suffering and toil, and not to a partnership of privilege and right? So, that was their influence on the President. So, my grandmother was discharged in 1919. Edme was 24 years old and a civilian once again. She decided to stay in Paris to resume her music studies. By then, Monsieur Plamondon was also in Paris. He played a significant role in her life for the next 20 years as a teacher, mentor, and friend, until 1939, when she had to flee Paris, and with my mother, who was 4 years old, before the Nazi invasion in the fall of Paris. Edme went to Saint-Tropez for about 2 years, and then somehow she and my mother made their way to Lisbon, Portugal, and managed to gain passage on the SS Excalibur to New York City in December of 1941. On its very next crossing, the same ship was bombed. Edme was 47 years old, just shy of her 48th birthday, when she returned to the U.S. In less than 2 years after her return, cancer took her life. She never lived to know the outcome of World War II or to celebrate her 50th birthday. I'm very proud of my grandmother, Edme LaRue. She was a courageous, independent woman with a strong spirit and a sense of duty. She lived on 2 continents. She was a veteran of World War I, a survivor of World War II, a music student, a singer, a mother, and a patriot of her time. All of these women of the U.S. Army Signal Corps were patriots, and what they accomplished as America's first women soldiers was above and beyond the ordinary. I want to say thank you very much for your time and letting me share my grandmother's story with you. It's been an honor. And Chris and I are certainly available for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to read my favorite part of this. There's so many favorite parts of this book that I had, but I want to read you my something that gave me a real sense about what their life was like. These Signal Corps women had to face 4 initial and very challenging tasks. They had to master their assignments. I thought that they were picked because of their skill in telecommunication. No, they were picked because they spoke French. That was the number one. So they had to learn how to be operators. Some of them. Number 2, they had to develop effective relationships with their co-workers, the other 200 plus women that went with them. They had to settle into military life. You know, it was like go down, put your uniform on, and get on the boat. There was no boot camp. There was no orientation. So they had to figure out how to live in the military. And the 4th one, which you can all imagine, establish a support system, and their most challenging people to get to win over their support were the men in the military, who were very skeptical about women in the military. And General Pershing said what he had to do is convince his senior officers that these women should be able to serve. And he wrote in his memoir, he had a great deal of difficulty convincing senior staff that these women were not only necessary but helping to win the war. He later wrote in his memoir that the female telephone operators were one of the Army's crying needs. Some of you doubted that they could do the job, but he said that soon vanished after they saw the increased efficiency of our telephone system as a result of their work. And then what happened was when things got more intense, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they were to go to the front, and the senior military people said, we cannot send women to the front, we just cannot do it. And the women said, we want to go. Awesome. As many of you know, I'm a very strong feminist. I love this.